Here is a video about the very early stages of drawing this particular apple. This video is going to be mostly on just sighting and measuring and transferring. Keeping it nice and simple, big shapes. So several things going on here, and I have a this was originally from a photograph like that. I'm gonna go ahead and use a faded out version of it to help the pencil show up a little bit better. So I'm going to do it just transferring this apple drawing just right to the side here and getting down the ideas and the concepts of understanding some proportional things and big shapes, and mostly just sort of strategies for drawing anything and everything. This is definitely one great way of understanding things. So the first thing I usually do is I start looking, sort of scanning whatever I'm drawing, and I start just getting an idea for what is up, what is down, what's right and what's left. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is to identify points on the object I'm drawing that are indeed the furthest towards the edges. I just made a mark for the left edge there. I'm going to say the bottom one is there. This pencil might be a little bit too sharp, but that's okay for now. The right point there. And the top point there. I will be transferring sort of the box for the whole thing, but then I'm going to break it down into a big shape, and I sort of think of things like this that aren't part of the main thing I'm drawing as sort of add-ons. It can be tricky to decide if something is sort of definitely part of the main object or sort of an additional thing that's kind of stuck on. I'll keep elaborating on that. So at the top, the right, and the bottom, and the left, and then what I'm going to do is create some corner crosshair marks so I can make a what I call a tic-tac-toe sort of bounding box. And sometimes, depending on what mood I'm in, I might actually just sort of sketch the lines, or I might just sort of, like I was doing, kind of aiming and then start making some indication marks. That way I can not be so embarrassed about my inabilities for drawing straight lines. No, this is well, partly yes, but just being able to sort of eyeball things in a vertical or plumb fashion is really good, as well as eyeballing things in a horizontal or level fashion is really good as well. Really good. I just said really good. So yeah, sort of making some corner crosshairs. The reason I call it tic-tac-toe, which you may know by now, is that I do like having, and I think it's helpful to have a little bit of overlap in the lines of my bounding box. partly because when we're making these lines and just drawing in general, we want to think about the lines we're drawing as having come from somewhere and going to some place. So too often if I get lazy right at this overlap point, which one might argue I'm doing right now, but lazy or a little too sloppy, and it sort of seems like it's fading off to the right, kind of like that. That can sort of influence how everything feels or looks and influence my other lines. Even though technically up to this point it's pretty straight, the way that you imagine the line sort of continuing on is going to influence things. So I like to keep those relatively cleaned up and whatnot. This one is giving me a little trouble up here. Just thinking about what is actually level, gauging it against the edge that I know is level. I'm going to say that that is giving me a good sense for now. I'm drawing this kind of, here comes the excuse part of the video. Drawing sort of cattywampus, which is always fun to say. So it's fitting in frame, but that may be sort of influencing me more than I want it to be. Either way, let's go ahead and, now that I have this bounding box and I have space to draw it right here, I'm just going to transfer over some of this information. I'm going to transfer over the height, overall height of this entire group of objects. You might think of it as one object, but I'm sort of thinking as the main apple and the stem and a leaf. There is the bottom of where I'll be drawing this. I'll go ahead and assign one outer edge. So that edge will be representing this one, the left edge. And now for the right, there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to both do a direct measurement and as well as a quick diagonal measurement to help confirm proportion. So I'm using my pencil and the tip of the pencil to my thumbnail, getting a measurement for the length of that, and then transferring that information over here. Tidy things up a little bit. Another good way to start confirming, or even just drawing from the get-go, proportions of rectangular things, or proportions of all sorts of things, is by using diagonal lines from from one corner of a given shape, in this particular case this rectangle, to the other corner. And because that's a long straight line that I'll probably need several goes at, I'm giving myself some guidance, some help, some training wheels, a little bit of easing into it. Whew. Yes, something like that. See how simple that was? But this diagonal line really, without getting too into geometry, it defines all the outer points of this particular rectangle and tells us how tall it is, tells us how wide it is, and where the points start and stop. All that from just one little line. So those points right there, there, and there, assuming that I can sort of create right triangles from that, will define that rectangle. So at this point, I'm just kind of trying to practice this skill, this notion of a diagonal triangle. Sorry, a diagonal of a rectangle defining the width and height of that rectangle. So all these ways of sort of checking and confirming along the way, I feel are really helpful. Though the more you do it, the less you'll sort of have to spend a ton of time figuring things out, and you'll just sort of be able to eyeball it quicker and quicker. But that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of work. I know, I've been working at it a long time and it's still confusing. So now that I have that in, I'll double check it one more time. I think that's pretty good. I'm gonna now aim for, so I got the big outer shape, and now what I'm gonna do is identify the next biggest shape and address that. And in a similar sort of fashion, I'm going to identify the top. Just going to, hopefully you figured out by now that I'm just doing the apple, the main body of the apple, fruit. Going to identify the top, bottom, top, right, bottom, and left of this. We already have 3 of those, but I'll identify the top and then give that shape its own rectangle. And then I'll transfer that over. So that's helping. I think I will start just kind of sketching in the apple per se. Sort of sick of all these straight lines. I need something curvy. Anyways, for anything that's spherical in nature, I find it extremely helpful just to start off with some sort of basic sphere circle of this thing that I'm drawing, just to start honing in on it. Obviously it's not a perfect circle, but this is going to sort of just get me off to a good start. I am going to make a note of these points, the outer points, so I know that the widest point of the apple would line up with about there for the left side. The right side would line up about over here. What about these guys? What about this guy? The bottom and sort of the top point. Didn't really map those in. I'm sort of, sometimes I deal with the outer edges first, but for this one I'm just sort of thinking of the apple right now. So I'm going to sort of notate where this touches the edge and relate it to what would be the midpoint of this entire line. And as I'm just eyeballing it, it looks like it's darn close to midpoint, this lowest part of the apple. I have a feeling maybe the actual middle is more about there. Let's find out. Wow, cool. Pretty close. But because I can't just sort of transfer that information straight across, this is when I have to start doing a little bit more measuring. But I'm using the idea of proportions, finding midpoints, and relating landmark points in a way that's relatively quick and relatively easy to check and correct and adjust. So that's sort of my bottom line, and there's an indicator for what seemed pretty close to the midpoint, using my pencil again. And I know that the bottom of the apple is right about there. When we're doing it one-to-one like this, you can certainly sort of measure everything directly, which is a great skill to have. But as you start doing more and more, and not just drawing something at the exact same dimensions, this proportion, the more and more you're going to need to sort of understand how to translate things in relation to proportions. So this was about the point for the farthest right. This is about the point for the farthest left. And so again, then for the top, I'm going to use a similar approach, except because it's closer to the top, I am going to shift to sketching in some information up here first. And I could make a crisscross on here, which is a very handy and dandy way to find midpoints. One of the only reasons I don't do is I start feeling like there's too many darn lines in this thing as it is. So let's relate this top point of the fruit of the apple. Imagine a straight line up. then let's transfer that information over here. There's about midpoint. About, I wonder if that's going to be. It does help to, I make my guidelines and guide marks fairly loose, sort of because I like doing that, sort of because I think it helps to keep things what I call finger tight, just finger tight at the beginning, and then tightening them up as I go. But if it's too sort of too finger tight, too hard to really gauge where a mark is, then it can be not very helpful. So that seems about the midpoint there. And then I know the high point for the apple is about there. This is also going to help me sort of for the high point of the whole group of things. In this particular case, the leaf. So if I imagine where that leaf would fall, it really is kind of in the middle of the middle. It's like the tip of the leaf is about there. Let's check out the other points on the leaf. A top right and a bottom and a left for the leaf. Even go so far as to give it its own rectangle. Top, right, bottom, left of the leaf. It's really translating things into the two dimensions of up, down, and side to side. See, the top of it was there. Hey, this is cool. Look at this. This is fun. I keep sort of splitting it in half, which is a great thing to be able to eyeball fairly accurately. I split this in half here, and I split this in half here where the top of the leaf is, and then I split this in half here where that tip of the leaf is. This left side is not going to be as well, I don't know. Somewhere around there. And once again, up-down information I can transfer straight across. When I say up-down, height, the height. So I can tell that my leaf is going to fall into a rectangle, something like this shape. And even though it might seem like overkill, I'm going to do the same thing for the stem. So I have the top point, the right point, which is also the bottom point, and the furthest left. And I'm giving that its own little bounding box. I'm going to make some guide marks on the edges where I'm going to need to measure. I'm gonna probably just sort of share that point as where the furthest right. Well, first I'm gonna transfer over the height information. It's going to be something like that. Seems like it was just sort of just to the left. I should have transferred this information too. This point falls, seems like not midpoints for this left half from here to here. Seems to me like it would be more like that, so it seems just to the right of that. So I'm going to estimate that that's about mid, and that's just about to the right. Drop a line. So you'll see, you can probably guess why this is called a blocking in. Really, I have a rectangle where my leaf is going to go, a rectangle where my stem is going to go, a rectangle where the apple proper is going to go. And doing these just helps me make sure that everything gets off to a decently accurate start when it comes to proportions. And the other great thing about just doing these rectangles to start with is that it helps understanding the curve of any object by giving you this negative shape to imagine as you're drawing in your apple. And just being able to think of this shape right here and saying, oh, maybe I'll just try to draw that shape. Something like that. But that is helpful because it takes our brain away from thinking we already know what's going on and just giving us a pure abstract shape that doesn't really mean anything. And that seems to let our brain get a better chance of actually copying it. So the leaf is gonna, I'm just gonna really quickly sketch in some things so I at least have an idea of what the heck I'm doing. So there I have my, you know, the basics. By the time you get all these lines that are guidelines and construction lines that I've sort of sketched over a few times, they're getting pretty dark and pretty confusing. So I'll often just sort of use my kneaded eraser and erase back everything a little bit. Give me a better idea of what the heck I'm looking at. I'll sketch in something again really quick just to make sure I know basically what I'm talking about here. And strengthen up those shapes a little bit. This is its own sort of fun shape. I'm not going to worry too much about that, but just to get an idea, I think of it as its own little cylinder. Let me see, the leaf, stem of the leaf is right there. So this gets us off to a good start, and is a great way to start off if you're like me at certain times and want to have a pretty good idea of where you're going, an accurate idea of where you're going. There certainly are times when this is way too much analyzing and it's fun to just jump in. But being able to sort of identify these sorts of things and measure them and transfer them to whatever you're drawing is a huge part of beginning any drawing. Okay, I'm gonna pause for now and do something different soon.